And welcome to Wolverine Live. I'm John Borton. I'm glad to have you back with us tonight. We've got a regular guest on tonight, and we've got a very special guest. Not that Tom Crawford isn't special, but you know Mr. Crawford from Press Pass.
Did we lose JB?
Uh-oh. I think we did.
Hey, Megan, you want to start that over? Megan, you want to start it over? Megan?
Thanks. Hello there. We are back live with Wolverine Live, and we are coming to you from our Inner Sanctum studios. I'm John Borton. We got Tom Crawford here from his various pursuits, including Press Pass on Fox, and of course the Crawford Podcasting Network. We also have one Nick Baumgardner, senior writer for The Athletic, and great to have you here with us tonight, Nick. We're going to be talking about this book, Mountaintop, and it's the inside story of Michigan's 1997 national title climb. He has worked with Mark Snyder, a couple of former Detroit Free Press guys, and done a great job with this book. We're going to be talking extensively about that. So, Nick, really glad to have you on tonight.
Thanks, JB. I really appreciate it. Tom, you as well. Thanks for letting me come on here. I wish Mark could come on. Mark's doing school pickup, I think, tonight, though. He's busy, so it'll just be me. But hey, I mean, I know plenty about what's going on with the current team. And obviously, excited to talk about the book too. You
can more than hold your own on that topic and a couple of other ones before we dive heavily into the book, which we will. I just want to talk a little bit about this start that Michigan is having to the season. We know that you've written about the 1997 Wolverines. All of a sudden, it's dovetailing in here with a Michigan team in 2023 that could that aspires to do what the 97 team does, which is very convenient and very nice for selling books and that sort of thing. I would just say, you know, if the 2023 team gets it done this year, boy, that is almost a tougher road. I'm taking nothing away from 97, because John Jansen's a very large man and would fold it. But, you know, with the playoffs added in now, I mean, it's a tall order to win that national championship.
Oh, yeah, huge. I mean, it's a huge task, and it's so much different. It's almost like, and one of the reasons why this book was so exciting, we'll talk about it later, was 97 was like a formative time, such a flashpoint for college football. It was the last year before the playoff. And as we know, guys, like, it's changed so much over the years, and now you're at a point where every second of every game is so critical. And really, at this point, if you don't have offensive line talent at an NFL level across the board, and then depth with it, and a quarterback who's capable, you're probably not going to be in the conversation. And Michigan, you know, fortunately for everyone on this show, or watches the show anyway, and on the team there, they have that. They have, I mean, for the first time, really probably since, and, you know, JB, you correct me if I'm wrong, since the Lloyd era, this is what that looked like to me. It's the five up front who really can get it done. And when they graduate, you've got 4 or 5 more ready to go. And right now, you know, with JJ McCarthy, this is as good a, you know, he's as talented a quarterback. I wrote it the other day. He's as talented a quarterback that Harbaugh has worked with in college since Luck. And I think he's probably the most gifted Michigan's had since Drew Henson. So that's where he's at. And I think he's gotten a lot better. But yes, like you said, John, I mean, it's a tough road, and we'll see how it goes.
There you go. Thoughts, Tom?
Well, Nick. I'm gonna, in all due respect, I gotta go overboard on the Drew Henson. I mean, I've been following Michigan football, Nick, since 1964. I think he's the greatest quarterback Michigan will ever have. Maybe when it's
you think
all
ever? Wow.
Yeah. You know, I still was at that Northwestern game, 54-51, when Drew Henson threw for like a zillion yards, and I said to myself, I've never seen anything like that. He was throwing dimes, but this guy, I swear to God, and people are tired of me talking about it. He's gonna be the best. And you know, when you really break down and tape a game and watch it again, his feet, his trajectory on his pass, and this all the other intangibles of leadership off the field, and he's in his downhill running, which we will see downhill running at critical times, and that's the ultimate test, I think.
I would humbly point out that on the same.
Sorry, I blacked out there, guys. I don't know what you.
I would just want to point out that on the same roster with Drew Henson was the greatest quarterback in the history of college football, or in the history of football, period. And so I'm thinking, okay, you know, had Tom Brady had the 97 defense in his
college,
back pocket, I get it, but I don't think that Tom Brady had the same defense as 97 and some of the same breaks, because in 99, had it not been for the Henson mania, I think Michigan had a real chance at that national championship.
But real quickly about Tom Brady, remember Tom Brady down at training camp and the love handles, and he's not cutting all this stuff, and the Tom Brady that evolved from that. That's a college version of Tom Brady. Does not compare to the NFL version.
That's 100% true.
That's my point.
Hey, we talk about it in the book. He learned to be that guy at Michigan, I think, during that whole thing. Yeah.
I would agree with that, but you got a little preview of coming attractions down the stretch: Penn State, Ohio State, and that Alabama.
I agree.
Oh my! I mean, I think he felt what was coming. Anyway, that's just my Tom Brady moment for the night. You know, I gotta have it. So, but Nick, overall, when you look at this Michigan team this year, how legitimate is the thought that, hey, it could compete because of J.J. McCarthy, because of an offensive line that, again, looks really solid, and a defense that seems to just reload these days?
I think it's the whole offense, John. I think it's not just JJ. It's so important that it is him, because he's made, and I keep saying that I don't really care who they've played for his sake, because the throws are that accurate. They're accurate against, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, they're where they have to be. The ball's going where it has to be. I think he has nearly as many touchdowns as incompletions at this point, or something like that, or close to it.
Yeah,
he's been as close to perfect as you can be, and he looks like the real deal to me. That arm talent is there. And I know people have been a little concerned about the offensive line, and I hear that a lot from folks. And I would point out, you know, they're bringing in a new center, and I know that Nugent there had a lot of experience at Stanford, but this is a different deal running this offense. And Oluwatimi was a special player. So I think it's going to take a minute for that offensive line to figure it out, but I do think there's enough talent there to do it. And I think at the end of the day, the difference is McCarthy. And, you know, on top of that, you have another NFL tight end someday in Colston Loveland, who's only a sophomore. And then the receiving core is really good. It's a disciplined group that I think Michigan, if you took their run away and you were a good team, I think they could still beat you with the pass. And that doesn't happen very often here. I mean, we don't say that every year. And I think that this is one of those years where it could happen.
All right. And we all have already heard from Tom Crawford in the past that this team is going 15-0. Tom, any reason to waver off of that in these 2 weeks?
Well, you know, at the Monday presser, Harbaugh, you know, did a little something different. He started to nitpick a little bit. And, you know, he hadn't coached on the field, so how would he know about it, right? But you know, about these, you know, not getting the chunk plays, the over 10-yard bursts. And Mike Hart alluded to this when we were talking to him on Saturday, and he wasn't blaming his running backs. There's some disappointment in that offensive line that Nick alluded to, and I agree with you. It's going to take it just can't seamlessly evolve with new additions. And
last year they did, and it was a special deal. Yeah.
And so I'm clearly confident that it's going to emerge, but it's just not there right now, especially when you're considering the talent they're going against. And when you go against a tougher rush defense like a Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State's defense is always tough when they play Michigan. You know, it's going to be a different, challenge, and they're going to have to be up to it to to smooth out some of these hiccups.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I would agree with both of you. This is certainly a work in progress, and but the beauty again of what they're doing and who's directly ahead of them, and even opening the Big Ten with Rutgers. I know Rutgers now isn't the Rutgers of old, but it's still better than facing a Penn State. Here's my question for you, Nick. Right now, is that you've got a couple of games that most people think will make the difference between whether or not Michigan makes it to a third straight Big Ten championship game or not. At Penn State, there in November, and then a couple weeks later, Ohio State at home. At this point in this season, which of those two games do you think will be the more difficult for Michigan?
Right now, if I'm looking at it today, it's at Penn State. I mean, and I hate to say that because Ohio State has so much talent, and I'm actually looking at a lot of Ohio State stuff for something later in the month before they play Notre Dame. They're going through something right now offensively, and it's very interesting. And they're changing a lot, and they've been changing a lot. And it's, they're trying to get the tight ends more involved in the run game, like Michigan does, like Georgia does, like Bama's doing. And it's, middling success is happening there. And that's not what you want to see necessarily right off the shoot. And then also McCord is not C.J. Stroud. I mean, he's not Haskins either. I think that he's certainly not Fields. And so I think you're dealing with a situation now for the first time, if you're Ryan Day and Ohio State, in a long time, where you do not have a top 10 draft pick playing quarterback. So you got Marvin, but they got to make some changes, I think, offensively. And I'm sure they will. But, right now I'm looking at it and I'm saying that's a team that's still trying to figure out what it is. And I think Penn State is probably closer to knowing what it is, even though it has a young quarterback and everything else. But the environment there would be the difference maker. Right now, I still think Michigan's matchup with Ohio State is probably about what you want, because Ohio State now is trying to do kind of what Michigan's doing, and Michigan's obviously better at it.
Yeah, no doubt. I would agree with you there that Penn State at this point, given the solidity of their squad, given the venue, we've all been to Penn State before and know what that's like. It's a madhouse, whether day or night. And so I'd give the edge to Penn State. How about you, Tom?
Well, excuse me, when I look at the schedule, I always look at road games, right? So we got Nebraska, Minnesota, right? I've seen them too many times now, or a couple times this season. That's not a threat to Michigan. So what's the other road game prior to the 2-game season? I call it Penn State and Ohio State. It is literally a 2-game season for Michigan this year, and it's Michigan State. And why do the Harlan Barnett press conference today, I know we're going to talk about that. There's something there that could galvanize, that could make that Michigan State team a tough out. If they get some momentum, play Washington competitive, might even win it, who knows? But that could be a tough game because of the toxic environment that we've talked about for the last 12 months. And that place has been a little bit haunted for Michigan, even when Michigan's had a cavernous talent gap lead. Like in 2016, they struggled for a while. They had the better team in 2021. They lost that game. The 18 game was a struggle, and they should have smashed Michigan State in 2018. So these are the factors that I consider that it's Penn State, obviously number 1, Ohio State number 2, worry factor. It's a 2-game season. And then that little asterisk out there. What can Michigan State do on the night of the October 21st when, they're serving alcohol now for the first year of the season? This weekend, and they'll just be humming by the time 7:30 comes around, right?
Well, I would say they will be, but the question might be how many players will they have on hand decide not to maybe save themselves for another venue in another year? I mean, how many of these guys just say, I'm not gonna play this entire season and then bolt out of here?
Well, I think and Harlan talked about that today at the presser. I think, well, right now they're locked in. I think Mark D'Antonio's presence is used for that reason. A lot of reasons why he's on the field for some crazy reason. He should be up in the box, but I think that's that was my first thought, JB. But I think they're going to engage. Harlan's a Michigan State guy. I mean, this is the same team You want to play. It doesn't do you good. So to sit out now, I mean, I just think that that's not going to be an issue, quite honestly, with this team.
All right.
I would also add there's not a lot of guys on that team. Like Keon Coleman would have been one, and he's not there anymore. But there's not a lot of guys on that team that you're like, oh man, they're like a slam dunk to be like they're all trying to prove it. Exactly. So I'm kind of with Tom on that. I could see, and Harlan's he's a good guy. I could see them playing for him, but it's like that's a big shock, and we're gonna have to see how this Saturday will be fascinating. I have no idea how that's
it will really be riveting indeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and the thing is, you take a couple of big losses early in the season.
Yes.
Find it with your head coach being gone. It could be a very dispiriting thing. Sure. Yeah, it could be something where, okay, we're going to rally around and we're going to pull together and we're going to do this and that, but you still have to do it on the field. And if you take a couple of hard body shots early in the year, that's when things start to get a whole lot tougher in later October and into November.
I think that Washington game on Saturday is just going to be so fascinating because I've gone back in the first game with Michigan State Central. They started out slow, but Noah Kim ended up making some plays late. And frankly, guys, the last 2 weeks, and I know again we talked about that with JJ. The opponent sometimes for these quarterbacks, so you make accurate passes. He could throw it a little bit. I totally understand why they were moving on from Thorne. I like a little bit of some of the stuff they showed. They've got a long way to go, and that's really on top of everything else long-term for the program. That's the bummer there with all this that Tucker got them into. But now it's like for this exact team, they look like they were maybe starting to find a little bit of something. And then, so we'll see, because John is 1,000% right. We've seen this 1,000 times, not to this level, but anytime a team has some sort of, whatever in the middle of the season, seen it at Michigan, seen it everywhere, right? Whatever it is, varying levels. They come out that next week and they either show you what they're going to be for the rest of the year, really.
One or the other.
It's one or the other. And they show you right off the shoot, they're either going to give you an effort all the way through, and it's going to be something that you're wowed by, or it's going to be like a great effort for a half, and then they're going to stumble, and then it'll be done. And unfortunately, that's more often than not.
Yeah, I go back to the 95 Michigan when Lloyd Carr was interim head coach. We had the Gary Moeller situation happen in spring. So also we had Lloyd Carr. He's down 17-0 to Virginia. It's about 95 freaking degrees out, and Mercury Hayes catches the ball in the end. If Mercury Hayes didn't catch that ball, I mean, who knows where that season would. That generated a little bit of momentum. I know they stumbled against Michigan State and some others, but
100%. That's a great call.
Critical that game. That game is so critical. The first one.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Lloyd Carr under the microscope, they certainly looked at in Mountaintop, and that's so many things that drew me in early on. I'm reading this book, and I think it was a brilliant stroke for Nick Baumgardner and Mark Snyder to start this thing off with Judgment Day, with Penn State, and with all the drama of that particular weekend. But what drew me in, I mean, I know about Judgment Day. I know about so many of the things that went in. Everybody knows about the Adrian Taylor hit, but it was the things that I didn't know. It was even being in every press conference, talking to these guys since '97. You're hearing from Marcus Ray, the never soft-spoken safety that was on an earlier version of this podcast for years, talking about how you really get to Curtis Enos and slow him down, the Penn State star running back, about Charles Woodson and how really literally shaken he was over the Adrian Taylor hit and what fell out of it in terms of those two guys on the field. Those are the kinds of things that, okay, I'm on board. I'm reading this thing because this is really good. Nick, talk about your thoughts on how you wanted to present this. I know you did an incredible amount of research on it, talked to a lot of guys, got Lloyd involved in the whole thing.
I appreciate it, JB. Yeah, and Mark and I, about 2 years ago, somewhere in there, Mark approached me and asked if I would help with an idea, more or less, and it turned into this is what it turned into. And it was a lot of research about everything, like you said. We write about 94, 95, 96, 97 in this book. Tommy mentioned the Gary Moeller. We write a lot about that in this book and stuff that I don't think people know or quite realize that happened from Lloyd's perspective significantly there. So, 20 hours of interviews with Lloyd. We talked to more than 100 people, over a 2-year period. We got Lloyd's personal notes, which I don't know that many people quite realize that. He took notes in a tape recorder at practice every day and had a staffer transcribe them. So we've got those two for the 97 season. And I think that, you mentioned it, the Judgment Day and Marcus, talking to the guys and getting so upset. And you could see, right, when he was telling that story to us about, how mad he was at Adrian for tackling Enos Lowe or whatever. And he was still getting mad. And it's like, you could see the investment that every player, coach, whatever, had in what they were doing. And like, that is championship material. That's what it takes. And it's like, every guy we talked to could go put themselves right back in that place, including Lloyd. And I think that Lloyd, when he was coaching, obviously when you're coaching and when you're close to that time, you're never going to want to pick favorites or point to one thing or another. But when all is said and done, there was never a better example of a team that bought into everything that was sold to them, lock, stock, and barrel for each other, and never blinked. And that's what that team was to me. So our task was, we got to find everybody's version of that, everybody's moment. And I think that was the thing I'm probably most proud of, is that I was telling somebody the other day, like, everybody has a moment in a season like that. Tate Shansky is a guy that I know you two remember. He had a moment. We found it. And when we talked to Tate, right? Like, so, I mean, all types of stuff like that. That was the fun part about this book, I think. And then, getting to learn more about, perspective from Charles Woodson about what made him great. Mike Gittleson. We talked to Mike Gittleson for 2.5 hours. I think that was like the third interview Mike's ever done. So a lot of fun stuff. It was a lot of cool perspective that I'd nenever heard before.
That alone is amazing, because I remember the first thing that Bruce Motti, the famous director of sports information, when I came in 1991, said to me, we were out at lunch and he said, okay, here's a piece of advice for you. Don't ever try to talk to Gittleson. All right. I never did. So if you guys were able to have that kind of sit down, first tell me what that was like, and maybe one of his perspectives, and then maybe talk about some of the most fascinating people that you interviewed.
So, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Gittleson in itself is really, if you think about it and you peel it back and you learn his story, and it's in the book. We tried to do the best we could in there because he's never really told it. Gittleson is the first ever strength coach. He's college football's original strength coach. Schembechler hired him, to be more or less that. But it was also like, we'll see where this goes. And it was just about, because nobody looked at weights back then. Nobody did any of that. Nobody did or took it serious. Nobody bought in. And he was the first one that was like that. And every single one of them that's appeared since is a derivative of Mike Gittleson. And it really is the approach of mental training as much as it is physical training. And to hear those guys talk about, and I've heard all this stuff over the years, even when I was covering the beat, John, about, and I know you guys had too, that Gittleson became like archaic in time and didn't keep up with the times. And there may have been, at the end, who knows, right? But really what they lost when they lose a guy like Mike Gittleson is the mental toughness challenge. When those guys explain what it takes to run over a line in a workout with Gittleson, where your body is hovering over a line, and if you don't do it, like, it's embarrassing to a level that nobody wants to feel. And it's like that. To me, Gittleson was the reason. Gittleson is the guy that kept it all. He's the guy that guys come back for. He's the guy that guys have the sayings that they learned it from, the history. And he was so humble about it. And, it's not about me. I don't care. And still to this day, I mean, he still never really talks to anybody.
Hey, Nick,
and he's very quiet. Yeah.
Nick, if I could interject. So,
fall,
it's 1978. I'm at Michigan as a student, not a football player.
Right.
So I want to take this cupcake class at the CCRB, weightlifting, okay?
Right.
So the instructor is this new guy Bo hired, strength and conditioning, named Mike Gittleson. So I went in there, the guy's got, he looks a little bizarre, man. I mean, he was
Vietnam veteran Mike Gittleson. That's right.
It was scary going to class. This is a 1 credit, just blow off class, right? Activity class. I was exhausted. I'm like, what did I say? I'm not a football player. And everybody was looking around. What did we do? What were we thinking?
Right.
It's great.
I think that he's the great example of, Michigan had so much talent back then, right? Every guy, even before Lloyd, in the Schimbecker days, Moeller days, I mean, the classes that these guys were bringing in was crazy. In the 90s in particular, they really were loaded up. And so everybody has talent. Everybody can train. Everybody weightlifts. It's all, but it's really that mental piece. I mean, you've got guys now to this day, that played on those teams and whatever will show up at Gittleson's door with advice in their life about business or whatever, because he's the guy they trust more than anything. For a lot of guys, he was like a dad. And so he's maybe number one on the fascinating list. Another guy, JB, Eric Mays. We talked to Eric for a long time, and Eric another guy who doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, and he shared a lot of stuff that I'm not sure people quite know about him. And it's when you talk about guys like Eric Mays and some of these other guys on the team, Rob Sweat, and then I see what the current team has done over the last 2-ish years. When we were writing this book, I couldn't help but note some of the similarities because of the role players, all those guys. And that was the funnest part of the whole book.
Okay. Well, yeah. Take that a little farther. I mean, what comparisons would you draw between 1997 and what Jim Harbaugh has going on right now?
Well, I think number one is the investment from the guys. It's like and I saw it, and I was still around them a little bit more than I am now in 2021. And obviously things have changed quite a bit, but there's still a lot of guys that are here now that were there then, and guys that were coming up and learning. And I could see it building then, and guys like Sainer still and Blake Corum, and like their buy-in and care level for each other was at a level that I had never seen at a time that I've been covering Michigan in the 10 years prior. And having gotten to know these guys in 97, and they all talk about this, like they were never on a team. Most of these, not most, but a lot of the guys, half the scholarship guys played in the NFL for quite a while. And, I was never on a team that close ever again. It was never even remotely like that. Guys like that, I go to the NFL and I talk to guys that played at other colleges, and nobody had an experience like that. We had a very special, unique group that cared about each other. And I think that that's what you have here. You don't see a lot of situations where Michigan is getting beat anymore by little stuff. The little stuff doesn't get them. They get all the little stuff. They get all the dirty stuff. And that's all effort and caring about the guy next to you. So that comes across in how you play. I've been around football long enough to know that. And that has been the number one thing, is how hard they play for each other and for the coaching staff. They sold out for Jim Harbaugh, that 2021 team, I would say. That's their legacy. They changed as Harbaugh would say, stop the train and got it going the other way. And they did it for him as much as they did anything. And back then, 97, they all knew, if we don't win something here this year, Big Ten or otherwise, or do better than 8-4, Lloyd's fired. That's it. He's done. And so, I could see similarities in that as well. Guys putting it on the line for their coach.
Very good. Yeah. Tom, jump in here. What are you itching to know from the author of Mountaintop?
Well, what I'd like to know from Nick is, you talk about the culture and everything, and I think the cultures are very similar. But when you talk to the Michigan players, I mean, Jim Harbaugh is referenced a lot, and then the free Harbaugh thing with JJ, I know, haha, and all that stuff. But there's two things that strike me about this team is the admiration for their coach and coaching on this staff is off the freaking scale. I'm talking about the players.
Right.
But I'm curious to know, I mean, what was the coaches working for Lloyd like? Was that a seamless situation of easy peasy, or was it difficult compared to these coaches on this staff seem to want to work for Jim pretty intensely?
Yeah. By 97, it was definitely that. That Madison was the one exception, Greg Madison, who we also talked to about some stuff, which is interesting in this book. But he's the one exception, right? Who goes to Notre Dame, which galvanized some things. But also, I think you got a bunch of guys on that staff that were, I liken them a little bit to an island of misfit toys. And they were all guys that came from, Brady Hoke was not really supposed to be there, and then he was there, and then he wasn't Lloyd's guy. And then he was stuck with them, and he was able to get Vance Bedford out of Oklahoma State. So it's like, it was kind of a hodgepodge, but nobody expected them to do anything. And they went through adversity, and Lloyd was up against it. And they all cared a lot about Lloyd. I think that they all knew how much it meant to him and how much he cared about them as people and everything else, and their futures as well. And so the similarities to me are exactly that. And that when you talk about Michigan's turnaround here, you can't do it without talking about how bad it got. And there was a lot of people that stuck it out and saw it and saw how it affected, Jim Harbaugh, and saw the changes that came from Jim Harbaugh and all that stuff. Lloyd had gone through a lot of stuff at a time in a very different situation, sort of picking the program up off the ground after the Moeller thing and trying to carry it and just doing anything he could to keep one foot in front of the other one day at a time. And there was so much about he took ownership. He recruited a lot of those guys. He had relationships with a lot of those guys, but there was so much about that's my coach. I'm going to do anything. We talked to Aaron Shea, and one thing he had said was, at one point along the way, Lloyd asked me to play fullback, and I hated it, and I never wanted to do it, and I never did it in the NFL. If anybody in the NFL asked me to play fullback, I would say absolutely not. But if the Browns had hired Lloyd Carr, he's like, I would have done it. I would have done it every day, and I would have done it until my head would have fallen off, because that's the difference. And You know what, Jim? It took him a while sometimes, and some teams had it, some teams don't. But it certainly seems like he's got that right now.
But Nick, do you think that 96 Michigan Ohio State game? Oh, Michigan comes off this embarrassing, this bad loss to Penn State at home, the block punt. You remember that for Penn State, and that everybody, no one gave Michigan a chance to beat Ohio State down there. And I was down at that game. And it was just going to be a coronation for Ohio State. They were going to, win the national championship. And Ty Street sits at, that slant route in the game. Brian Greasy, they hold. Chris Howard carries the ball, and all of a sudden they win the game 13-9. I mean, do you think that one generated a lot of momentum in '97?
Huge game. We talked to Jansen about that for a long time, about that game specifically. John. In fact, John's favorite drive ever. He told us the favorite drive he's ever had as a player was the last scoring drive of that Ohio State game, where they just milked the clock and finished it with it. He said he's still mad they didn't finish in victory formation there, but I think it was they ran power and counter 15 straight times and nothing else, and they just completely mauled
Howard
them.
The ball carrier. Howard the ball carrier. That's all you heard over that.
That's all it was.
Howard the ball carrier.
And that was, he said that was the first time that he thought him and some of the other guys that were around, the younger guys, that we can do this, we can hang with anybody. Our problems are only our own, because that team had already lost 3 games and would lose one more. But I think for him, he said that crystallized that day, because he's like, our defense was so good. And they were, Ohio State could do nothing. That was maybe one of Woodson's best games he ever had. Yeah. And people don't remember it, but that 96 Ohio State game, Marcus was good too. But it changed a lot. It changed an awful lot. And then after Madison had left shortly after that, I think that galvanized people even more. And it turned into this, momentum thing that it really never stopped.
All right. That you mentioned Aaron Shea, and the mere mention of the name Aaron Shea, I've had many conversations with the man. I got to slip in my favorite story that Aaron Shea ever told, because it was a later version after 97 when you had the whole Henson and Brady thing going. And I recall that in one game, Lloyd wanted to run the transcontinental, which, of course, the quarterback throws to a wide receiver. The wide receiver pitches it all the way back across the field to the wide open quarterback looping out. And therefore, they wanted Tom Brady to fake an injury so that he could limp off the field and let Drew Henson be in for that one. And Brady was kind of ticked about it. He said in the huddle, how do I fake an injury? And how do I run like I'm injured? And Shea looked at him and said, Tom, just run like you normally do. I love that one. One of the things I want to know from the book and from that 97 season is, so many people talk about, that blowout that set the tone against Colorado to start, or Judgment Day when they blew Penn State off the field. I'm fascinated by the close games. They turned the ball over multiple times against Notre Dame and could have let that one slip away. We all know about the necessary comeback against Iowa when they dug a deep hole. And the game against Wisconsin. Wisconsin was no gimme at all that year.
Tough game.
What did these guys think that made the difference in when it got really tough? Was it that defense, or was it just a special determination? I'm fascinated by in those moments, because we've seen so many Michigan seasons where you might lose 1 or 2 games, but it's that moment where you need to just do something to pull it out, and that 97 team did it.
The best part about it, I think, in those situations, it was never the same person, group, or guy. It was always something different, because you're right, JB. The first one, the Notre Dame game, was the defense. The defense bailed them out time and time again, over and over. Everyone, and it was a movie at the time in '97. Everyone had seen before, right? It was something that we were all familiar with. Anyone who'd watched that game had seen that game sort of before. But yes, that was the defense doing its job. But then you get to that Iowa game, and Greasy plays so poorly in the first half, and goes in the locker room and takes full ownership of the whole thing, and then comes out in the second half, and there's so much with Brian's backstory about coming back that year and everything else. But that's the game, that second half, when he just completely let all the other stuff go and became a championship, probably an NFL quarterback, and he just never looked back after that. And that's sort of the cool thing about that team is you didn't have, and in the Wisconsin game later on, that's both sides probably. You have big stops defensively, and then the offensive line making plays in that game, controlling the clock, doing things like that. You had everybody sort of pulling their end of the rope. And I think for the whole team to see Greasy respond the way he did like that, it was such a different era with the quarterbacks back then. No one could transfer. There were some guys back then that would argue that run that Michigan had of, with from Elvis and Todd Collins and Brian and Loeffler before he got hurt, Scott Dreisbach before he got hurt, Brady, Drew. I mean, you're not going to find too many better stretches. And the thing there is those guys went through some really intense competitions, really intense mental, strains. And I think for everybody there to see fifth-year senior 1997 Brian Greasy overcome all that and still be standing and be like, we're okay, we can win this thing like that. I don't think they look back after that. When I really look back and talk to every guy after they beat Iowa, I think it was there's no reason that we should lose a game again this season.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe another underrated part of that season involved the offensive line of Michigan, because we talk so much about the defense. We talk about Brian Greasy and Jeremy Tooman and Ty Streets, but you're talking about two redshirt freshmen on that offensive line that were starters and became they were pros. And did Jansen talk about that aspect of it, how they put that line together and how it grew as the season went along?
Yeah, he did a lot because it's such a fun deal. They were so different. There was everybody, if you remember, John, there was panic before the season. What are you going to do? They have nothing. You have this talented kid, and everybody knew Jansen was good, and everyone knew that he was going to be a good player. So you got him, but then you're like, okay, Backus is a talented recruit, they thought, but the fans didn't know that at the time, that there was no message boards back then. And same thing with Hutchinson. He was an old defensive lineman who they were like, we're really excited about this, but we really don't know. We don't know how it's going to go, but we don't have a choice either, right? So Jansen talked about that a lot. He said that the guys in 96, a lot of seniors graduated that didn't win a Big Ten title, guys that were good guys, but it was like their team and it was their line and it was you played under their whatever. And, that year, there were a lot of young guys that got to have their voice up, and that offensive line was a big part of that. A lot of them were young. It wasn't, Adam, he was older, and I think they all respected the heck out of him for what he was, moving positions and stuff. But, other than him, a lot of those guys were young. Hutchinson, first time. Jansen, second-year starter. I think Backus, first-year starter. And they were growing and learning together. And the best part, I think, the closeness there. Jansen, Hutchinson, and Jeff, extremely close. All those guys were close, but those guys I think stuck together even afterward. And just obviously they played in the NFL for a long time, but they pushed each other, and it's generational level players. Hutchinson's an NFL Hall of Famer, right? I mean, and John and Jeff played in the NFL for a dozen years or whatever it was. So to me, that means you got three generational guys together at the same time, and they knew it and they pushed each other, and that to me is what's special about this team. There's a couple different spots on the team. That's not the only one. You've got other spots along the roster competition, internal, whatever, but pretty special group overall.
But Nick, I wanted one last question about the comparison 97 to this 2023. How about overall talent, sheer talent, and depth of talent? It seems to me 2023 has it over 97. Is that a fair statement?
Well, we'll have to find out because the time will tell on the current situation. However, I will say that because that one in 97, there's a stat in there in the book, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like there was a 15-year period, maybe a 17-year period, and it's not just Brady, where a guy from that 97 team played in a Super Bowl, almost every one of them, like 15 of 17 years. The guys they put in the NFL that year were like pros, like true professional football players. And so that's why I say time will tell. However, this, I don't know what Harbaugh said, 20 guys or whatever he said. I don't know if they'll hit the number that he said.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll hit 20. They will certainly hit a dozen. They'll certainly hit close to 15. And, this is the one year that they had 2017. I think they put a bunch of guys in the draft. This is more talented than that. And this is more talent than I think last year, probably overall in general as well, in terms of the draft, right? So we'll see. This is a really talented group, though. That's why I think they've got a shot.
All right. We're into the fourth quarter of a very fascinating conversation with our good friend and colleague, Nick Baumgardner. I'm very happy that you joined us, Nick. I want to know a little bit more about the process because you and Mark Snyder put this thing together. How were the duties divvied up? And how
I'm curious to know about that.
Yeah. So we did all the interviews with Lloyd together over in person with Lloyd. He's local here, obviously, still, so that's good that we got and as many of those as we could. We got done in person because Mark and I live pretty near each other. But we did most of them on Zoom. Most of the interviews we were able to do on Zoom, which helped a ton. And once the writing process came, I think we sort of decided to split up. This was an easy-ish book to outline because it's like it's a season. So we sort of tried to keep it as chronological as possible. And we, I think, did a smart thing really early on, very early, before we even sat down and started writing. It said, okay, whatever this chapter will become is yours. This is Nick's, this is Mark's. And we just sort of divvied them out and split them up that way. And just said, just write it all. And then we'll come back and, try to smooth it out. Gene Myers, who was editor at the Free Press for a long, long time, was our editor. And the best part, John, and you guys will know this, is we didn't have a hard deadline when we started it. Like we talked to some places that were interested in doing the book. And I was like, we cannot do this with a hard deadline. We ended up publishing it ourselves through a separate situation there, which was an adventure in its own right. But not having a deadline helped an awful lot because we were able to sort of really make sure that we got everything and really make sure that it also sounds like you're not have two people writing it at the same time.
Okay. Well, then tell people, how are they to go about finding this book, and, purchasing?
Yeah, right now, it's on Amazon, obviously. You can search Mountaintop on there or my name or Mark's name, Nick Baumgardner, Mark Snyder. Michigan1997book.com has got all the information. We've got some reviews, some excerpts linked up there. We've got an excerpt from the Free Press, excerpt at the Athletic. It's at the MDen right now. We have books there. It should be at the MDen on Main if you're on campus for a game. It should be at the MDen in all, I believe, the stadium locations as well, 4 games or somewhere in there. Schuler Books in Ann Arbor as well. And I think we're going to talk to Literati here soon. So we're slow rolling it out, but it's making its way to all the bookstores. But right now, for sure, Amazon's the easiest way to get it.
Very good. All right. Well, before I let you go, obviously these last couple of years have featured a real turnaround in the Ohio State series, which to me is the key to Michigan season anytime. Right. And because that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And they got over the top there. That means they're in the Big Ten championship game these last 2 years. And if you are in that, you're going to win if you're from the East. Historically speaking.
Right.
Take us back to that showdown in 97 against the Buckeyes, because you're talking about one offensive touchdown scored by the Wolverines in that game. And it was, give us a little peek behind the curtain in that one.
It was a fascinating game because every guy on the team, that's a very close game. That game was a one-possession game for a long time. And
absolutely,
every guy that I talked to were like, I didn't remember it like that. We kicked the shit. We beat them up. Like they remember dominating the game. And it was like they did not, like there was a play late in that game where Greasy, they're only up 6, right? It's the end of the game. Mm-hmm. And Greasy it slips or falls or does something. The ball comes out awkward and he throws it right off of either Katzenmoyer or the other linebacker's chest. And it's like, it would have been a pick 6. Or something, it would have been bad, really bad.
How about the 2-point conversion? It almost got conversion. It was almost taken back.
Yeah. Yes, and then I remember. So I asked Lloyd even about that. He's like, "No, I don't remember." But I don't remember that. But I think that says to me that the focus that those guys had in that game on every single snap was at another. there's a great story that Rob Sweat tells about and I know everybody remembers the play. You guys remember, I'm sure, where he chased down Katzenmoyer on that blocked extra point and chased him, and he just like the story he tells about everything going through his mind about, his career, how far he got there to that point, everything he had to go through. Here's this super recruit, linebacker run down the field, and it's Michigan, Ohio State. And like his mindset was like, they get no points. They get none. They don't get nothing for free. Everything they get has to be the hard way. And he's like, if I have to chase this guy down, I'll die doing it. I'm going to do it. And that was, to me, that epitomized not only that game, but that whole season. That's how they played every single game. And so in those close games, they didn't feel it because like they're the great example of a team that really didn't run from pressure. They applied pressure. And I think that's the sign of a champion.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about it. They had what it took to get it done. We do want to mention one of our sponsors here, and that would be, of course, before we let you go, take a minute out to shout out the sponsor of our Tuesday night recruiting show and longtime partner of the Wolverine and Lewis Jewelers. Simple question, guys: is your daughter's engagement ring bigger than that of your wife? If the answer is yes, great news. Lewis Jewelers can help. It's stress-free and easy working with one of their non-commissioned expert trusted advisors, finding that perfect diamond. So stop by today, guys, and fix this family issue. Lewis Jewelers, your diamond store, and so much more since 1921. Visit them at their new location. That would be 300 South Maple Road, Ann Arbor, or online at lewisjewelers.com. That's LEWISJEWERS.com. That's Lewis Jewelers, where Ann Arbor gets engaged. And again, extra special thanks to Nick Baumgardner, our visitor tonight, talking about the book Mountaintop. Make sure that you pick this up, get a copy. It's very good. Tom Crawford, thanks for joining us as always.
See you, Nick.
We will see you all next time around. I appreciate your following, and good night, everybody.